kick off a wave of purchases from nation states, and the impact on the market will be significant. Look, countries around the world own more than 20% of the gold market. Until we get to equilibrium there, you can say that that's a gap that needs to be filled. It's looking increasingly likely that that will be filled in the next couple of years.
So to your point, it may not happen this cycle, but the conversation, the dialogue's happening. You already have countries that have made Bitcoin a legal tender. There's some that are buying, adding it to their reserves and so forth. But it feels like we're at the dawn of the next Bretton Woods, that this asset is getting recognition and adoption globally. And it seems like these central banks and world governments will eventually get there and come together and say, yeah, this is something we need to put right aside of gold.
Yeah, I think at least you have to consider that as a possibility, right? If you back up 5 years or 8 years or 10 years, people talked about this idea of central banks adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets or governments positioning strategic stockpiles of Bitcoin, but it was crazy talk. You would be laughed out of rooms for suggesting that. The reflexivity in the Bitcoin market is actually fundamental, which is different from how reflexivity works in other markets. By that, I mean, as more people adopt Bitcoin and as the price goes up, to a certain point, Bitcoin legitimately becomes more valuable because it is more widely accepted, it is more liquid, it is more established, it's less likely to go to zero. And I think you're going to start to see that positive fundamental reflexivity playing out in Bitcoin over the next couple of years as this truly goes from alternative to mainstream, which is the mega trend that we're seeing right now.
Matt, do you think the folks at Vanguard are kicking themselves like we effed up here?
They're going to get there eventually. They're going to get there eventually. Tony, as you know, I come from the ETF space. Vanguard today is one of the largest ETF providers in the world. But in the early days of ETFs, they were very skeptical. They hated them. They talked about them harming investors. They eventually got there. They're going to eventually get there on Bitcoin as well. They aren't the only person to crypto. One of the things that's happening right now in crypto is what we discussed at the beginning of the pod, which is the Overton window is shifting on what's possible. Could we see ETFs on more assets? Could we see institutions building on chains that are maybe, don't have ETFs associated with them? We're starting to see that already. And I think a lot of institutions are just going to want broad-based exposure. So I'm excited about ETH specifically. I'm excited about other assets. I'm excited about index. I think that's going to grow substantially in 2025.
Speaking of index, yesterday you got news that New York Stock Exchange ARCA filed for a 19B-4 to uplist Bitwise's top 10 index fund as an ETF. Tell us about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, because of the regulations, I can't comment much more than what's on the file. But yes, NYSE ARCA filed to uplist BITW as an ETP. We'll see how that works through the system. But I think if you broaden out again, there are two mega themes that are going on right now. One is that we're getting a regulatory shift from no ETFs to a broad-based ETF market. We actually, your point of view, if it's your mom, if it's me, if it's an endowment, I think many people share that point of view. And for them, an index-based solution is a really nice choice.
Absolutely. And, going back real quick to the ETH ETF, I just thought that, look, with the change in the regime at the SEC, we could see the staking get approved next year, which would be so appealing for many investors to have the yield in addition to holding the underlying asset.
Yeah, you do see abroad internationally, you see ETH staking ETPs, and obviously that makes it more appealing. It makes it a net positive to own. It overwhelms the expense ratio. I do expect to have, those sorts of conversations with regulators happening next year. I also expect, people to start to push for in-kind creations and redemptions on ETPs. So we're going to get some efforts to iterate on the existing ETPs to make them even more perfect, as well as new ETPs. I do think hopefully that dialogue will continue and sort of accelerate in 2025 before we eventually got there. So So take that with that grain of salt. But the reason we filed is because we thought there was a pathway to get it launched. Otherwise, we wouldn't have filed. And we're excited to continue to pursue that in 2025, particularly with the new administration.
Can we expect more altcoin spot ETF applications?
I think it's likely you're going to see the industry try to expand the type of assets that are available in ETPs. Yes.
Mm,
There's some challenges there.
sure.
Altcoins are different than Bitcoin and Ethereum, where they're regulated futures markets and there are other things you can point to. But again, I look abroad and I see a wide variety of crypto ETPs that have lowered costs and made it more secure for investors to gain exposure to these interesting assets. I would love that to be true here in the US as well. And Bitwise and other high quality firms, I think, will be pushing for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there was some big news this week that Bitwise in their bank accounts and things like that, but they can put in an asset where they earn a higher yield.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, look, if you look at the traditional financial system, a lot of what it does is it takes people's idle assets and turns them into profit centers for banks.
Yeah.
I mean, that is effectively what the banking industry does. It's a lot of what the brokerage industry does. If you look at a business like Charles Schwab, they make a huge amount of their money off cash deposits that they underpay from an interest perspective. And that should frustrate every investor. They are your assets, and you should derive the economic value that they can generate. One way to think about staking from a big picture perspective is it allows, the actual owners of the assets to accrue the vast majority of the economic value that can come from them. It allows you to put it to work in the market. And of course, I think that's going to be much more important in the future.
Matt, amazing stuff. I am so excited. I am hoping Bitcoin hits 100K. We're very close before the end of the year, but it looks like 2025 is going to be brighter days. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate the insights.
Thanks for having me and having me back again. I look forward to doing it again.